headquartered out of Austin with offices in New York and San Francisco, and we take good care of our clients in UPS out of our Atlanta office. And on a day-to-day basis, it's my job to just make sure that we have all contemporary thinking, and the agency runs completely flawlessly every day, of course. But we're most proud of that we actually have over 50 technologists down in Austin, which is 25% of our company down there. And being a designer and technologist formerly myself, it's near and dear to my heart. We actually operate more like a game company most days than we do an advertising agency. So this is really great. So I'm glad everybody's here to get all these learnings, and so that you can go back to your agencies and define what innovation means for you, because that's most important. What's innovation mean for you and your agencies and your clients? So we have a great next panel. The next panel is data, space, and context and creative, which is a perfect talk. You know, it's really asking the question again is, what the hell are we going to do with all this data again? We now have websites, we have these mobile applications, we now have the Internet of Things. I don't know what that is. It's just there's things in the internet. And but the point is that we have all this intelligent data gathering, and we now have near real-time analysis. And you can spin up a Hadoop cluster and a custom analytics package in a matter of minutes now. So it's time that we actually take the design of user-centric experience more seriously, and of course, dynamic creative. No one better to talk about this but Mike Baker. He's the CEO and co-founder of DataXu. There on the end. You know, DataXu is known as the fastest growing company in advertising, according to Inc. magazine. He's certainly a thought leader in this space, an early pioneer in mobile advertising, and often quoted for his passion for data-driven marketing and transformative digital transformation. So, and he's the guy to ask, if the machines can do it better, why not let them? So you should ask. I think
the format of this, just to get us going, where I'm going to actually ask each of my panelists to introduce themselves, sort of develop their sort of dangerous thought on this topic of data, context, and meaning, and then we're going to dive in from there. So what I'd like to do, though, is to encourage questions in line as we go, rather than sort of have questions afterwards. So to the extent we can make this a discussion, awesome, we'll do that. So I'm going to tee it up. So data today and tomorrow, here is, I want to suggest this is the new palette from which, you know, we have to work as creative technologists. So from the year 2012 to 2020, you know, we're talking about going from, you know, roughly 2 to 4 billion connected people on Earth through the internet. We're talking about devices going from, you know, 8+ billion to 40 billion devices, right? And my guess is there'll be a lot more if you count sensors as rather than devices. Some people think 1 trillion by 2020. And then the data part of this, which is the wide part of the funnel on this numbers play, which is it goes up an order of magnitude times 2. Does anybody here know what a zettabyte is? This is great because the Microsoft Nerd Center, usually this room, there's like a bunch of hands go up. How many zeros in a zettabyte? Anybody? One guess, come on. Yeah. How many? 21. So it's kind of like incomprehensible, but you know, we're going to get into that. Who cares about all that data? At the end of the day, the bottom of this funnel is just the number 1, which is a person. All right, on that note, Byron, please introduce yourself, tell us what you do, and give us your dangerous thought.
Sure. Thank you. Only 2 mics, apparently. So I'm Byron Ellis. I'm CTO of SpongeCell. At SpongeCell, we're a creative technology company or an ad technology company. We specialize in dynamic and interactive creative that are responding to some sort of external data, typically, whether that's targeting data, a feed for the customer, or some other external thing. Really depends, things like the weather. We either modify the ad or integrate that into the ad in some way, as well as, you know, some of the more rich media type focus things. Personally, I'm a statistician by training, not a computer science person, so I come from the data side of the background, although I do specialize in big data and large-scale computing type applications of statistics. So from my perspective, data, whether it's for targeting, whether it's in the ad, or even the analytics coming out of the ad that's being fed back into your systems to do something, it's all about telling a story, and that's just another tool that you use to tell the story. Like the last talk we saw with the wind and things like that, using visualizations to tell the story from data. Creative in the advertising space can also use that data to tell the story, which is something that's not been really used for.
So let's show a visual here. This is an example of dynamic creative. We talked about Keith's former brilliant life at a firm called BSSP in San Francisco. I learned today that the competitors sometimes call it butt shine. So, you know, you know, that's going to go down on my board is what I learned today. So this is an example of dynamic creative. It won an award for data-driven creativity. What's going on in something, you know, break down dynamic creative for us from, you know, its most mundane uses to its fantastical ones.
Sure. So, I mean, dynamic creative 1.0, kind of that Terracent, Toomey, Dapper era in the, you know, late 2000s, 2008, 2009, somewhere in there, was kind of about sort of trying to optimize creative. It wasn't about that storytelling. It was about, does the red background or the blue background work better? Whereas today, it's more about using it for either personalization or, in this case, for responsive advertising, right? It's responding in this particular ad, even though we didn't make it, so sadly, it's responding to what the local weather is for the consumer, and giving them something that's hopefully more relevant to what they're experiencing right now than it would be otherwise. Because otherwise, it would just be a generic ad, and maybe it's showing to me in San Francisco where it never gets that cold.
Right. Well, and I think in San Francisco, it's a running jacket,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
with a picture of the sun.
Right.
So how do we know? You know, how do you think about dynamic creative in terms of, well, you know, what's successful? Because you'd have a lot of sort of direct response clients say, well, you know, how many clicks did I get? And I get a higher click-through rate when I'm able to show you a relevant, you know, an SKU of a relevant product, something you've been shopping for. But you know, you're saying that's kind of the beginning days of dynamic creative. As it gets into storytelling, I'm an analytics guy. You know, how do you measure success?
So, I mean, there are a lot of options there. That's kind of that's actually something we're currently still exploring, because I think the space is really underdeveloped right now. I mean, nobody really does this too much today, right? When we do it, it's, you know, we're coming in as almost a special case a lot of times when we're being asked to do something like this, as opposed to kind of the day-to-day. So right now, I think we're still kind of using those traditional tools. You know, we work a lot in the brand space. We're looking at brand lift and things like that. We actually look at engagement rather than clicks more often, because you're right, we're not often in a direct response sort of situation. So we're actually looking at, are people interacting with the ad? Are they hanging out on the ad? Are they doing something with it? Especially, you know, if the ad is interactive in some way.
So let's get to your dangerous idea. I mean, we're talking to a room full of creative technologists. Huge opportunity here around all the new kinds of data coming into the environment, be it weather or the prevalence of the flu or humidity or pollen counts. Sure. Or you name it. What's the opportunity and what's the big challenge in trying to use this kind of information to make more relevant storytelling?
So I think the opportunity is that this data is actually available now. It's actually something that we can feasibly, from a technical perspective, collect and deliver to an ad in a real-time basis.
So the real-time is a big part of why DCO is interesting.
Yeah.
Because we're having trouble in other areas. We can get a lot of data, we can derive insights, but how do we sort of put them to work at the speed of life?
Right. Well, and the challenge that is actually goes directly to that is you can collect data, you can invent things to do with it, but how do I act on that data? I think that's the challenge we still have today is actionability from something happening. Like, okay, so somebody's watching, Gillette's shaving video in Dallas. And there are 8 of them and they like this particular one. All right, what do I do with that information other than put it in a PowerPoint slide? Mm-hmm. The challenge is, okay, let's go to the next step and let's actually, while the campaign is running, do that. And while we're at it, let's have fun while we do it, right? Like maybe we have an ad where you can instant message with somebody else watching the ad somewhere else across the world. That's actually a feasible thing you can technically do now.
Right. So in a way, here's the challenge Brian's throwing out there is just better creative concepting work given these tools and real-time technologies. Vlad, let's turn to you. Why don't you tell us your background and what you're working on and why you're here?
So I'm Vladimir Levantovsky. I work as a technology strategist for a company called Monotype. You may have heard this name when you use your computers, your devices that produce text. So basically, we are developers of most of all famous fonts that you use in any of the devices. You probably don't know that we also a technology company that basically provides all the software that needed to enable devices communicate with humans. And I'm talking about any kind of devices. And for the last 12 years, my job was exactly that, to enable many different devices, not just PCs, but all the devices that we wear on us today, to have and support advanced typographic capabilities. Because guess what? Humans didn't change radically for the last 10, 20 years, and we still communicate with each other via written word. So the typography and the way how written word is presented on screen, it really matters a lot, and devices up until now have been subpar compared to printed word communications.
So Vlad, let's talk a little bit about that. Devices. We just saw that there's going to be 40 billion connected devices. A lot of marketers have the challenge of trying to sort of holistically engage a person, a consumer, across this very sort of fragmented device graph, where you may use 5 or 6 different connected devices in one stream of activity or day. Talk to us about the technologies. I know you're on the advisory board of HTML5, and I believe you are, if I have that correct.
Well, it's an advisory committee of W3C that develops HTML5.
Thank you. So talk to us a little bit about sort of how this works and what are the implications for sort of writing once and rendering exquisitely everywhere, in terms of not just the technology, but also the creative process.
Well, actually, I'd like to start with creative process first, and start with something, with a very simple statement that I think many people they intimately understand, but take it for granted. So when any of us, when we do presentations, when we just talk to each other, we say something, but really what matters is not what we say, it's how we say it. So we communicate using voice. And that's exactly what's missing in the printed communication or in the written word. So when you communicate via written text, whether it's a simple text message or an advertisement creative content, you substitute your voice with the typeface choices that you make.
And we have some examples of that, yeah?
So basically, this is now your voice. It's how you say it that matters. It's just a different medium. And when your voice is missing, you may actually run into something that, if you can, you can see, for example, the ad on the left looks kind of cheesy, versus something on the right side looks authentic. You can believe it. And the only difference between is that in one case, you send the text that is rendered in a font that you didn't know what it was. It gets substituted. It's completely unknown to the creator, versus the font that was exactly the way it should have been. And that's what's different now with the technology. So when you created creative content using print, you knew exactly what's going to be printed. When you do the same using images, what you see is what you get. Same with Flash. The content is created, maybe interactive, but it's been proofread before it's presented to someone else. And that concept changes drastically with the personalized content, when you create multiple different components as a building blocks, and then send those building blocks using HTML5 to a browser, and ask the browser to create the user experience for you to be seen by the person you don't know. So in that case, if you don't know, if there's no assurance that what you want to be seen is different from what you see, first of all, you don't know what the experience will be, and if it's broken, again, you have no feedback about that. So that's where it becomes really important. And just to, it's really a joke, but just to give you an idea how important that is. So just imagine a group of hardcore bikers riding this. Do I have more slides?
Well, you're going to have to really just imagine that group of hardcore bikers, because there's no slide. All right, Vlad, we'll come back to keep thinking about those bikers, hardcore bikers. John, hi. Hi, John. Thank you for being patient. These are very long intros.
Absolutely.
John, tell us about yourself and sort of what you're focused on within the realm of data analytics and creativity.
Sure. So, John Kane, I'm part of something called Instrumented Intelligence and Emerging Analytics inside of Sapient Nitro. I've spent my career in and around the intersection of technology and the social sciences. So that's the perspective I'll be bringing into the panel. I was a founder of a business way back in the dark ages called eLab. It was a group of social scientists, PhD, anthropologists, sociologists, theologians, linguistic folks. And what we would do is go out and understand people in their native context and bring that understanding or those models into the development process. And I'm doing that again now inside of Sapient Nitro, but we use the Internet of Things, sensors and other kinds of instruments and data to develop pictures of the everyday world, about people's stories as the basis for innovation and change inside our clients' business.
Can you give us an example? It sounds good. I'm picturing like a pack of bikers. No.
Yeah, a pack of bikers. Well, that's a microculture. So you'd want to understand meaning. So, one of the things that I love to think about is that the only relevant story here for me, and I'm a little bit of an extremist, is the person's story, your story. It's not so much the brand story. That is there. There's an ethos or a germ of an idea. But when that brand comes into your world, that's your context, and that's the context of meaning that we need to understand as developers, as architects, in order to design for and design towards and shape. So an example might be a retailer that we work with. I've got little sensors, heat sensors sitting in ceilings, and what we're doing with these heat sensors is looking at engagement and pathways in venue. And we've also got a panel of households in which their smartphones, tablets, and laptops have little loggers that pushes to our back end what's in focus. And what we're trying to build up is a picture of physical adjacencies. What happens before and during and after a store visit? Where do people go in the store? That's a story. That's the person's story. And then we're trying to use that data in new ways to adapt the interior of the store or the messages that might happen on a smartphone or something that might happen a week later. So we're trying to build adaptive, responsive environments and digital engagement points based on actual behaviors.
And where are we in that sort of journey to creating that sort of on-site, data-driven consumer utopia?
I think we're at the beginning edge, at the most exciting point. It's phenomenal to be alive today. It is the most creative, inventive time listening to you guys and how we're starting to think about story elements as deployable smart packages that can change based on context. Data that comes from the context, whether it's weather data or activity data, physical activity behavior, digital behaviors, and these story elements can now recombine in new ways. That's amazing, and I think we're just at the beginning edge of this new era.
Well, there's a nice jumping off point for our discussion. So story elements combining sort of dynamically based on sort of in context, on-site, what's occurring right now, the ambient intelligence. I have, to facilitate the discussion, I've asked my panelists a couple of questions, and I thought we'd display them graphically here. And we're going to start with the first one, which is, we have probably more agreement on than some of the other questions. But I asked the panelists, the volume of consumer data we are generating and collecting will change the creative and brand experience. Where are you? Strongly disagree to strongly agree? You guys all seem to agree that this is happening. But let me poke at that a little bit. Your example with the store. You got a lot of consumer data. You're going to do things dynamically to modulate my behavior as a consumer in the store. What do you guys think about like the privacy issue of being that pervasively monitored and understood so well by a brand? What as creative people, what's the limit of that, or how can that be done in a way that's not offensive?
It's creepy. The anxiety is real. I think the anxiety that we all feel about being followed. I think there's one dimension of this story that's alive in the media today, and we have to broaden this story out a little bit. Because as long as there's reciprocity, as long as there's something in it for me to contribute something about me or my data, there's something I get back, whether it's discounts or money or new experiences or things, information that I can use about my utility, my consumption of when and how and where these things are happening in my life, then that's a...
Is that part of your design process? When you talk about social scientists and you collect your information to make an informed design, is that part of the process?
Absolutely. Everything we do is opt-in if we're studying individuals. Everything that we do, that we try to choose technologies that are not about personally identifiable information. There's no Wi-Fi, Bluetooth sniffing camera stuff. That's why some technologies like heat maps, we're just getting basic readouts of where bodies are, for example. Mm-hmm. That's one way of addressing this. The anxiety is totally real, though. I want to say that.
Okay. Other thoughts on the panel? Byron?
Sure.
I mean, I agree largely with the creepy factor. I don't like being creeped out by ads as much as the next person. And I also agree with the, we have to think about sort of as a business, right, as a community, like how we actually move to that opt-in sort of mentality away from the opt-out mentality we have now. Like, how do we actually make it so that somebody wants to share that with us? For example, we were talking about my shoes, actually, before we came up. And I was talking about the store. They are. I like them a lot. But I also like the brand a lot. So, the culture of the brand, which happens to be Flubog in this case, is I know when I go into the San Francisco store that Eric, the store manager, knows me. He knows my tastes. And he knows who I am, and we go in to say hi, right? Like, I have that relationship with the brand to the point where, he knows which shoes I'm going to want before I even get there, and already has my size set aside so I can get them. And that's that reciprocity, right? He knows a lot about me and my shoe tastes. And out of that, I get a better relationship with the brand. I actually get the products I want rather than... Right, so there's a critical thought. Yeah, and the other way they could have done it is just track in the database all the shoes I bought over the years and then, creep me out by sending me a pair of shoes in the mail. That would be weird. But they could totally do it.
So in a way, you're saying humanizing the intelligence versus sort of... this mechanized sort of, stiff response, which we're all sort of used to online right now. I'd be curious, anybody in the room who's had a creative personalization experience as a designer, as a creator, that sort of backfired, where you ran over a line and... No? Nobody? That's interesting. So maybe you guys are not taking enough risks in your work. All right, that's why they pay me to moderate. I'm going to move on. Actually, I'm going to move on, Vlad, but hold that thought. The next one is the big idea in advertising is dead. The future is mass personalization. This one surprises me. These guys should be agreeing that it's all about mass personalization. That's what you described, isn't it? So why do you guys disagree? The big idea is still very much well and alive? Okay, Vlad.
Okay. I was actually...
No, Vlad.
I was
on to the next idea here.
Whether to take the strong disagree position or just disagree.
Good. Thank you.
The reason I was hesitant, because when I saw the question, to me it sounds like, okay, the mass personalization is the next big idea, and yet you ask me if I disagree with the fact that big idea, or agree that big idea is that. How can it be? So,
okay, is it the final big idea?
Okay, no. There will never be final big idea. I think that we will see that every new idea, which is big, will produce bigger ideas, and that's basically the way the evolution
let me challenge
goes.
that. Did anybody see? I'm just trying to think of the last Facebook video I watched that really affected me as authentic and engaging, which was the Jane Goodall, the chimp being released out of the box and coming up and hugging her before it went off into the wild. Did you guys see that? Did everyone see that? I mean, that was authentic. That was nobody's idea other than hers, kind of broadcast out onto 2 billion connected consumers. So that's an example to me. That's not a sort of a monolithic agency created big idea. It's just a cool idea, a snapshot of one person's experience that's so inherently compelling and authentic that it connects with a lot of people really quickly. What do you think, John?
Agree. I disagreed here to try to speak to your point. There needs to be a big idea, an organizing idea. Every brand has sort of DNA to it, and that's where it connects with the human world, or doesn't. But that's the trick in building the company-customer relationship, is figuring out those connection points.
But let me challenge that. So you're saying you have to have a big idea to connect with people, but why does it have to be one idea? What I'm arguing against is the big reductionist logic of the sort of legacy agency workflow process that starts with this really wide flange and it comes down, 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 boom, the big idea. Copy this over, a quadrillion device ad unit sizes, and that's our ad campaign for Q4.
Great point. And I think that is an artifact of the Mad Men 50s, 60s era of mass advertising and push media, in which we're trying to get one message extruded out to the entire world, kind of like Stone Age. Probably ideas of ideas, or not all the way down to personalization like the individual. That I think that misses the idea a little bit of, it's not about personalizing like monogramming, it's for me, but it's maybe in collections of tribes that now come together that couldn't before when the network wasn't there for that to happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, so when two and two, it makes sense. I mean, when I looked at this, I thought of, maybe it sounds like I kind of misinterpreted when I strongly disagreed. Because for me, the big idea is that organizing narrative, like we were just talking about, right? Like, there is always an organizing narrative, and mass personalization is like it's a storytelling device, right? It's a rhetorical device that's used to move that narrative along, whether that's for the brand or maybe for a very risk-taking brand, letting their audience, their people who are identified with that brand move that narrative along on their own, right? It's sort of like combining a tool with that narrative that I disagreed with.
Okay, so let me press the point a little bit. Can if it's all about storytelling and narratives, and that's goodness, do we need people to create them, or can we program algorithms that follow storylines, character, predicament, overcome, happy ending, and then sort of fill in the variables based on ambient data?
No. I think that's something, when the AI people or the anti-AI people, right? You got Elon Musk claiming that Skynet is coming the other day. Sort of out of context, though. Yeah, but I mean, that's actually, as somebody who works with AI software on a routine basis, that's actually not what's happening. Computers are very good at certain things, pattern recognition, doing the same thing over and over again. They're not very good at creating abstraction. That's something that's sort of, at least for the moment, maybe it changes probably after I'm dead, that ability to abstract and create from nothing, essentially, or create from disconnected things, a new world, is something that's human. And that part will always be there. What the computer does, what the algorithm does, what the software does, is it helps you tell that story, right? It's like CGI in movies. CGI didn't destroy movies. It just became a new storytelling device. And you have companies like Pixar who make people cry with CG. It's still the people. They're just using that as the medium. It's the same for us. Yeah. Cool.
Okay, we're going to move on. John, advertising is dead. The future is conveying your brand as a useful service to the connected consumer. So you agree with this. Your panelists disagree.
Advertising is dead. Remember the old Time magazine cover that said God is dead? I think it referred to the concept. It wasn't making an argument that there is or isn't a God. I think this is very much... there we go. Thank you. Yes. I'm buying into Mike's earlier point. I think the concept of a monolithic big idea or unifying idea is got to give way to multiplicities of ideas, not down at the individual level. That's I think, slightly off the mark. But advertising in the sense that we've known it in the past is dead. And we've got to find new platforms and ecosystems in which to connect companies and customers. I could mention some examples of maybe things you haven't heard of, but we've all heard of Nike. It used to be if they wanted to get 3 million impressions, they had to buy a Super Bowl ad, but now they have tens of millions of touches a day because there's fuel bands and there's running apps and there's all the things that you want to do that connect the apparel and the shoes and you name it. And it's a really marvelous idea, this platform, this ecosystem of touch points. Everybody likes to cite Apple. You're touching that brand or those products thousands of times over the course of your year. You couldn't get that through advertising. You couldn't get that number of touch points, and that's what I was responding to.
So Nike is a brand that sort of crossed the chasm from being sort of an old-fashioned product company to conveying its brand as a useful service in some ways. When we look at the exemplars of that idea are like Google and Facebook and Dropbox and Uber, and in some ways these digital services have the benefit of their brand is their utility. It's one thing, but here's a thought starter. Let's talk about like Colgate or Clorox. Clorox is my favorite example. It's like, right, bleach. It's the definition of advertising. Like, why would I care about Clorox, right? So how would a, for somebody who agrees with this proposition, how would a Clorox or a Colgate convey their brand as a useful service? Does it only work for certain brands? This might get the creative juices stirring out there.
Could be. I actually think with some of the P&G brands, some of the more, if you look at the life and death of your average app, it's within 50 days. But
Your average what?
App?
Mobile app?
Yeah.
So some would argue that branded mobile apps are just dead on arrival.
Just almost DOA. But one of the notable exceptions is that I think it's Tide has the little app of like, if you have this kind of stain, here's what you do for it. So they've elevated the story above like what is the cost of the product on the shelf to what does this thing do in your life? And they've just figured out some new touch points across the ecosystem or platform for this concept, this abstraction of this thing that cleans and removes stains to intersect with you in a different way. That's an example. Is it going to change the world? No, but I think it's a notable and successful example.
Okay. Vlad, how about you? Why is advertising not dead?
Well, advertising as we know it may be nearing its end, but that really means that the advertisement will change. To advertise something as a service, what used to be a product is a new form of advertisement.
My question is, does it really work to push messages? Or do we need to sort of create honeypots of utility or engagement or fun and sort of redefine the consumer experience around pull versus push? You strongly disagree here, Byron, right?
Yeah.
So let's hear it.
I think there will always be advertising in the sense of that kind of push. Here, I can hold that for you. Sorry. I was like, are you going to? Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, there will always, because, brands, especially like big brands like Clorox and things like that, they will always have an identity to establish for themselves, independent of who they're, of the people who use their brand. And there'll always be an element of that. Like Vlad was saying, maybe, it's the service it becomes the message. But I think at the end of the day, it's still a message, right? Like they're still espousing some ethos that they feel is important to them. So it'll always exist in that sense.
Any comments from the room? Okay, just raise your hand if you have one. All right, we're going to move on to, we'll go in. Here we go. Smart creative employees have left agencies for technology companies. All right, we're going to get into it here. I like to create controversy. How many people in the room work at an agency? Raise your hand. How many people work at a technology company? All right, I'm going to say we got 3/4 to 1/4, or maybe 4/5 to 1/5. Let's see. We got one person who agrees. John, we're going to put you on the spot here. By the way, smart creative, for those who have worked at Google before, is a Google term. I think at this conference we're using the term creative technologist, but it's meant to be the same thing. People who can blend the creativity with the sort of innovation and design. And
it's an interesting intersection. It's a tricky intersection, this marriage of marketing and IT, traditionally, these two domains. It's a very, very tricky intersection. Sapient Nitro is an example of a kind of new breed of agency. We're using the agency language, but to try to talk about the intersection and marriage, in some ways, a shotgun marriage between marketing and technology. These are domains that don't normally work together. But if you look at the omni-channel world in which we all live, that's a buzzword. But your day and your experience and your consciousness is seamless throughout the day. You don't think of having channel experiences. You just do what you do. And you run across some ads and you pull out your phone and you send a text and you might buy something tonight or go eat dinner. That's all seamless to you. That's the world of continuity, the real world in which we all live. Business is waking up to the idea that these pieces need to work together. So I was being a little bit controversial, a little bit tongue-in-cheek in saying that
Thank you.
the smart creatives are in the technology firms.
Okay, you guys who disagree, why?
Well, I think that good example was presented earlier today. The company called Under Armour. All the boundaries are wiped out. I mean, I don't know if it's an apparel company or a technology company. And for that matter, when you talk about the agencies, I would say agencies are becoming technology companies. That doesn't mean that people are leaving; they're actually coming in. So that's the reason for my disagreement. But again, working from the purely technology company for many years, I really have no idea what the agents are doing.
All right, there you go. And Byron?
I disagree because I meet them on a routine basis. And, it's probably biased because if I'm talking with somebody, usually they're going to be more technical just because of my role in SpongeCell. But I meet creative technology people all the time on the creative side of agencies who are often working with technology and trying to scale up and do things like that all the time. And they're in there, fighting the good fight in some sense. And so they're there. The primary problem is accessing, right? Like we often come in, by the time I talk to them, it's often too late to really do much, for example.
We have one more survey question, and I did have a follow-up question on some of the topics, but let's get to this one first and make sure we don't have any audience questions. So agencies are competent in creating campaigns, but ill-equipped to create connected consumer experiences. So you, John, strongly agree. I guess, is Sapient an agency, by the way, or I guess now?
Breed of agency.
Right, now that you're owned by Publicis, I think you're an agency. But go ahead, say more about this one.
Thank you. Well, I'll go back to my Omni. When I speak to agency folk in the conventional sense, and we talk about experience, and I've spent 25 years in and around the humanist perspective on experience, from the person back out to the world, not from the brand to the person. But if you look at our everyday experience and you look back, it's not just does the desktop site match the mobile site, as some agencies tend to define experience. Experience is all of the ways in which we touch the world. The example of Nike and the platforms that they have around golf and around running don't just touch digital properties, but also physical things as well and environments as well. And we've got to think agnostically across all of these, I'll call channels of experience. The places you go, whether it's just out and about on a break here, is a place that you go. And we've got in home and in your car and on your break and waiting and being bored. Those are all of the real experiences. And I don't see that all agencies think quite so broadly across that range of things. Therefore, they're ill-equipped is the way I frame this one.
So in fairness to agencies, though, oftentimes it's their clients who are constraining the work. You at Sapient probably have a wider palette, especially if you're doing things on site or in stores, because if for no other reason than it's the ground is less well trod than, say, the work of a traditional media agency. Does that resonate at all?
That resonates, and I want to be fair to say that it does happen in pockets and places, but coming from, I've been arguing a lot lately from I'm trying to be very contrasty and say from the 50s and 60s and brands and comms. From that perspective, agencies are ill-equipped, but the ones that are breaking through and are working across environments, and I don't just mean brand and comms environments, but designing and building interactive, engaging environments, that's where the real action is.
Good, I'm going to take any questions. Raise your hand for the panel. There must be something. I have one if oh, here we go. Yeah, let me bring the mic by, yeah.
Earlier on, you guys were talking about the need to humanize an automated, human data extracted, real-time advertisement. That sounds like a really awesome idea, but I'm not really sure how to do that. Like, there's a lot of missing pieces. So what would be your recommendation to start to take large data sets, harvesting, behavior, identity, et cetera, and actually turn it into that personalized human touch?
I mean, I think it's going to sound sort of trivial, but the key is to start simple. You know, a lot of the experience I've had with trying to do this, and we try to do this fairly routinely, is everybody wants to jump into the deep end of the pool from day one and, you know, have 3 million different creatives and different variations and 8 different calls to action and blah and blah and blah, without really, they just kind of like, there's a tendency to throw everything in, including the kitchen sink and the dog and the cat, and not really, and then hope something works. I think that's been a big challenge. It's also a big challenge just for the workflow process that exists today. I mean, how do you get approval on 3 million different variations? Like that's often a requirement. We're going through this right now because we're doing catalog stuff for a company down in Australia, and they have 3 million different users, each of which have a personalized ad. And are you going to approve all 3 million of those? No, you're not. You're going to maybe look at a few and hope that the rest work. But the workflow for advertising is just not set up for that right now. So if you want it to be successful, you have to start simple. And the easiest way is often like something you would enjoy. You know, if I saw this in an ad, like one of my favorites is we did some ads last winter for the Colorado ski resorts, and they had the snow report in the ad. Super simple, but you know, that's the thing I'm interested in when I'm thinking about going snowboarding, is what's the snow like? Is it deep? Is it shallow?
It's a great example, and it's a good question too. I think if there's one thing I'd love to see is the creative people coming together with some of the data and analytics people, because it seems like these tribes sort of cohabit the same world but don't really intersect. That's why actually what Byron's talking about is interesting. But if you think companies like DataXu have spent so much time and money targeting ads down to a millimeter of precision by demographics, psychographics, recent purchase behavior, you name it, how often is the creative actually modulated at the edge? And it's been my great frustration that people don't want to pay for the creative. Actually, that's what we see. Target this bit of ad within an inch of your life. And it's like, really? Like, that doesn't seem that useful. Give me like 8 different creatives and let me discover dynamically what consumers are interested in and like inform the creative brief with data by working grounds up as to who consumed which content, what kind of people were they, and then let's scale that.
So hi, Mike. I'm Alan. I run Creative First Aid at Nitro in New York. John is my partner. We're living the intersection together. My question to you is, the medium isn't the message is the message. So how much of your time are you spending focusing on the message versus the plumbing side of the media? To your previous point, and to your question just now, is addressability at scale going to move anybody, or is it just going to be business rules that change headlines?
Yeah, great. Thank you for provoking the provocateur. Do you want to moderate? Okay. It's a great question. I just think the business of ad targeting and programmatic buying and selling of ads, which is all the rage, it's what my company does, has completely overshadowed sort of the underlying creative dimension. So consumer creative context, the context and the consumer elements of things in the data-driven world are way more developed than the creative is. And so it's been great frustration actually to see the ecosystem sort of stuck in some of its legacy ways of working, where matching the right piece of content to the right consumer, that fundamental moment of creating relevance has actually been undermined by the sort of orthogonal development of the disciplines. So I do think it's like the big opportunity for people like Byron and for people in agencies as well, to actually wed these things. It's why I love the Adobe message, from the CEO. It's absolutely the right message, to bring the creative and the audience together in new ways to produce relevance. Part 2 of your question was, okay, so what? Why does it matter? And my observation is, we're all whenever we try to innovate, we have to show our boss or our client metrics that show we were successful. And we spend a lot of time negotiating what success looks like if we're smart, and we kind of pull down the barrier and hurdle it easily and build momentum. So oftentimes that leads in the marketing domain to people with more direct sales objectives, which can be sort of quantified more easily. This is where we've seen a lot of the dynamic creative to date, and it has been about click-through. But what we're starting to see is the first brave brands and agencies looking, data-driven ways of measuring the overall impact, like emotional impact, psychological impact of really great storytelling. So I'll give you a live example. If I can tell you the right story, or somehow you have the right content and storytelling to the right kinds of people, I should be able to watch their behavior online afterwards, and it should over-index for the concept that I'm promoting. In other words, they should just naturally be searching and browsing through content that bears some affinity to the underlying, brand promise, story, value, whatever I was trying to promote through the personalized messaging. True, but it should affect your. Here's the provocative question: shouldn't it affect your psyche somewhere? Or put it this way: if it's affected your psyche at all, right? When you say, yeah, okay, fair enough, it should show up in your connected behavior. That's what I'm saying. So in other words, you don't have to pay Millard Brown or do the CBA study. It should show up in your connected behavior, and the exposed should over-index the non-exposed in their connected behavior. If we parse through the URLs, companies like DataXu are seeing every human on Earth 2 times a week anonymously, so you can start to see the patterns and see who is controlled and exposed. So I think there are new ways to measure just really the very raw sort of psychic impact of storytelling. And I know we're running out of time. One more question? Anybody? I had one question for the panelists. I'd love to, what central problem from this panel is actually sort of creative and technology working together, specifically around the analytics and data. Do any of you have, an anecdote or a tip or an example of how can other businesses make these two competencies work seamlessly together?
You're looking directly at me.
Well, I know
we talked about this.
You have an anecdote,
yeah,
but I'm really interested in sharing tips.
Yeah, so
nobody seems to be
we've actually run into this problem at SpongeCell, right? We've traditionally been a very sort of standard structured technology company, product team, engineering team kind of on one side, operations and what we call production, who are our creatives in the middle, and then the client and sales kind of on the outside. And never, the communication shall never flow except down that path and back the other way, if at all. And one of the problems with that we've had more recently while we're doing these larger build-outs, these bigger integrations, is you actually need the engineers and the clients talking to each other, because the engineers may have done something where once they see what the client is trying to do, they're like, oh, we built that 6 months ago and we just didn't tell anybody about it. Sorry. And so what we've done more recently is we actually have a more vertically integrated team. So we have this large Australian project that we're working on where we have the engineers, the operation, the production, sales, and even the client in this case. There's kind of 2 or 3 from each group actually all working on a single team. Like the engineers are working on more global infrastructure, but with the purpose of rolling out this product. The production people are working with the engineers to optimize how the creative interacts with that infrastructure. And then the client is actually feeding us data, and we're going back and forth on how that data should look and how it should work, and making sure it all runs smoothly before it ever rolls out, so we don't get into that situation of, oh, you gave us a spec, but that wasn't in the spec, and this sort of thing. So it's in the engineering side we use Agile, and it's kind of moving that process to even the business process. And so far so good. It's got some problems, but it's going okay.
Well, to me, the whole question sounds a little bit of a contradiction. Again, I'm from Monotype, the company that develops font and font technology. So in our company, type designers, which are the creative part of the company, and engineers who write software, I can't even imagine them working separately, because if we work separately, there will be nothing produced at all. Type designers need tools. What they produce need to be rendered by the devices. So again, it creates constant updated, self-updating loop where engineers and creative part just inseparable. That really is how we operate.
And do the teams sit together?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
there you go. Well, the future is monotype.
The best way to get teams to work together is give them a goal or an objective outside of their own silo. In a consumer or user-centered world, a experience-centric world that we're in, a model of human behavior, whether it's bikers or women shaving their legs, studies that we have going on right now, these experiences can be modeled in a sense, the relationship between attitudes and perceptions and behaviors. And these models can become touch points for the various silos, for the technologists, for people developing requirements, for the strategists, for the marketing people. There's one piece that could unify, and I'm just supporting my experience-centered tribe there, but I think that's one unifying piece that works for us.
Cool. Well, I want to thank all the panelists and answer the question, what's coming up here, with the simple one-word reply, lunch. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody.